We'll study Divine Simplicity just very briefly here. It's got some definite relevance to, well, it's a major theory in medieval philosophy. It's still studied a bit today, quite heavily actually by Christian philosophers. We'll just go over it briefly just so you get an idea of what it is. It's all we'll have time for, because we need to get moving on some more issues in medieval philosophy. So, in your Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article that you have for reading, now it's tough reading, so you have to definitely put your college level reading mindset on when you read it. You may have to look up some words and so forth as well. You know, some things you might not understand. That's okay. That's how philosophy reading goes. You're going to run into a word every couple sentences or a phrase that you don't know what it is. Like temporal parts. We'll go over that. So let me just get started. Talk about this a little bit. So according to the classical theism of Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, their adherents, God is radically unlike creatures in that he is devoid of any complexity or composition, whether physical or metaphysical. Okay, so what that means is there's a number of Bible verses attached to this Doctrine of Divine Simplicity. Philippians 4:7 is one. John 10:30 is another. We'll talk about, and which medieval philosophers were concerned with. Philippians 4:7 says that the peace of God is beyond all, it passeth all understanding. In other words, your minds can't comprehend it. Your minds are too small and insufficient to comprehend the peace of God. That'll be relevant here in a minute. So you'll get an idea here that when you study the Doctrine of Divine Simplicity, that your mind is not sufficient to understand what God is, because God does not have any parts, okay? Any internal components, inner complexity. At least not as far as we humans in our mindsets and with our limited finite consciousnesses can understand. Now when we say it doesn't have any parts, that's based on another verse. There's a number of verses, but one that's often associated with Doctrine of Divine Simplicity is John 10:30, where Jesus, I believe he's talking to an angry mob of Jews, says, "The Father and I are one." So he's referring to the Creator and himself as being one entity. And then interestingly, 2 verses later, Jesus calls that same angry mob of Jews gods with a small g. So that's often been debated a bit by people through the centuries. Now, if there's a lot to this idea here. The Father and I are one. That, firstly, when you look at Jesus, he has a body. Okay? He's a human being, and so they say, yeah, he's not one. There's pieces of him. There's many parts to him. But it would appear to be the case that Jesus is referring to the consciousness of the Spirit of the two, which are really one, Father and Christ, so therefore that Spirit, which was later discussed quite heavily in the Trinity, the concept of the Trinity, which we'll be discussing a little bit when we talk about medieval philosophy next week, or maybe on Friday, we'll get to it. That Spirit must be one, without parts. Okay? It's the only thing that we have to compare it to this semester so far is when we discussed the philosophical atom, the Greek atoms of the ancient atomists, which were basic building blocks of nature which had no parts. Okay? And of course we had very difficult time grasping and conceptualizing what something like that would be like and what the philosophic atoms are like. So God is going to create even more conceptual difficulty. Now, two things here. One, contemporary philosophers have just smashed their heads against the wall, so to speak, over this issue. In addition to, you might want to also take a look at Wikipedia's Divine Simplicity page. It's really good. In some ways, it's I'm not going to assign Wikipedia for your reading, obviously, but in some ways, it's going to be more informative for you than the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article. So I'd take a look at that, especially if you're interested. And you'll see here, and they talk about criticisms of the theory, and they'll be talking. It's in here somewhere. Sorry. They're going to list some of the main, Alvin Plantinga, William Lane Craig. These are two of the most well-known Christian philosophers in the last couple decades, which have problems with the Doctrine of Divine Simplicity. Now, that's one. So fine. Okay, so there's a lot of concern over this doctrine among philosophers, but on the other hand, the authors of the Bible don't have any problem with it. They think that God is something that is not graspable by your finite mind, at least in your human state, in your human setting, in this plane. And when you pass on to wherever you go after you die, then maybe you will be granted the ability to understand and comprehend it more. There's a lot of verses in the Bible that say, God, you can understand God and so forth, but it would appear that those verses are only saying you can maybe just get a taste of what the nature of God is, because there are other verses like this that say, that imply that aspects of God, or God, are beyond our understanding. There's a number of things that we have to go through here, which, anyway, let me just, now also, if God does not have any composition, it doesn't have any parts, okay? Therefore, God has no parts in time. Okay, what's a part in time? Well, you exist at this second and at this second, right? So there's 2 seconds that you existed, okay, and you exist now and so forth. There are different pieces of time that your consciousness and yourself exists in, okay? Notice I said pieces. Those are called temporal or time parts, temporal parts. Well, God doesn't have any parts, according to the Doctrine of Divine Simplicity, so therefore God would not have any existence through pieces of time. That would therefore mean God is outside of time, or eternal, which is of course in line with Christian philosophy. So additionally, also God does not have any parts in space, meaning God does not have any extension. So does that mean God is like a philosophic atom? I have no idea. Probably the authors of the Bible would make some of you feel more comfortable. They'll say you don't know and you can't know because it passes all your understanding. It transcends all your understanding. God does. Okay? And philosophers who strain to try to understand God are trying to understand something which they can't understand. Okay, they're trying to do something which they'll never accomplish because their minds simply don't have the mechanics, the resources available to them to understand something because it's too large to fit into their minds, okay, human minds. So, important to think about a distinction there between philosophers and authors of the Bible who have sort of a different view on this. Let me get it. Yeah, anybody has any questions at the time, just let me know. I'm just going to go down here a little bit. Anybody have anything yet? At this point? Okay. Let me read here down bottom of the first page. The Doctrine of Divine Simplicity, DDS. Incidentally, this person who wrote this article, Bill Vallicella, former university professor in Arizona, he was one of the persons who wrote one of my letters of recommendation to get into graduate school at Purdue. I remember before teaching this semester, I went and got this article off the same Encyclopedia of Philosophy the other day when I started reading it. Because I'm like, look who's the author. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. So the DDS represented not only in classical Christian theology, but also in Jewish, Greek, and Islamic thought. It's not just something found in Christian philosophy by any means. Okay. All right. It is understood as the affirmation of God's absolute transcendence of creatures. That's that Philippians 4:7 verse there. God is not only radically non-anthropomorphic, non-human-like, okay, but radically non-creature-morphic, not really resembling any sort of biological entity, or maybe not even representing something like your consciousness in any way. Okay, be bigger than that. Okay, there's a verse in Isaiah where Isaiah says that angels can't even look at God because His majesty overtakes them. It's too much. So even perhaps angels have trouble dealing with the greatness of God. That's what I think the implication is here. It's very interesting. Now, so God is non-anthropomorphic, non-creature-morphic, not resembling any sort of life form or form of consciousness that you can imagine. Not only in respect to the properties He possesses, but in His manner of possessing them. Okay, we'll explain what that means in a second here. This is the philosophy of the simple God. Remember we called philosophic atoms simple entities, simple meaning no parts. That's what this involves here. This is called the philosophy of the simple God. Okay? And needless to say, so God, you can think of God obviously as like a spirit then. But of course, when we say spirit, we have very little cognitive power to understand what we mean by that. All right? So therefore, it has a very different mechanics or ontology. Very different from any of the created. We're talking about Christian philosophy, so we're talking in terms of biological entities being created rather than evolved. And so God is very different from any of the created biological units on the earth plane. Okay, so you get down here a little bit. This is page 3, section 1. Anybody have any questions on this? Just want to make sure everybody gets this because it'll become clear as we go on what exactly we're dealing with here. One central consideration derives from the Anselmian definition of God as maximally perfect, as that which no greater can be conceived. Okay, a God who is less maximally perfect would not be an absolute reality and an appropriate object of worship. Okay, so they're concerned. These philosophers are concerned with ultimate reality. Again, we heard that in Eastern philosophy. We heard that with Plato. Philosophers have a tendency to keep going back to where's the source of everything, source of our information, our knowledge, source of reality. Yeah, that's many cases that's why philosophy is philosophy, because the source of things goes beyond our observation. It's not something we can see, have empirical experience of. It's not scientific information. Now this exists in science as well. The Big Bang theory relies on the idea that there's an energy point that existed 10 or 20 billion years ago, according to the theory of the Big Bang, which may not have had any size. It may have been like a philosophic point atom, and started to expand, and boom, here we are. But the point is that nobody has observational experience. Nobody's seen that initial point of the Big Bang universe, the singularity. So it's a philosophical topic discussed by scientists. You see that all the time in science, where philosophy is discussed by scientists. Okay, now they have indirect evidence, they will say, for asserting there's a Big Bang singularity, and some of it's pretty interesting evidence, sure. But nevertheless, until it's observed, it is a theoretical or philosophic entity. So philosophy and science are constantly crossing each other's paths, which I suppose is the reason that you take philosophy classes in college. All right, we already saw that before when we studied cause and effect. Okay, so, all right, let's scroll down here a little more. Keep moving on. Besides perfection and necessity, this is page 5. Besides perfection and necessity, immateriality, eternity, and immutability also seem to point to simplicity as their ground. Okay? So the qualities of a simple, if you have a divine agent, a supernatural agent which causes and creates everything, and it is a simple, in other words, no parts, it's partless entity. Again, I'm not sure if you can think of it like an atom or not. It might just be beyond something you can comprehend. It's almost, think of it as a mind with no pieces, or a soul with causative power, but no parts. Okay? Something like that not only will be viewed as perfect and necessary that it exists, but also non-physical, of course, eternal, unchanging. All right, so these will sound like a lot of the core principles that consistently through the Bible God is described in terms of. And now, of course, in the Bible, God interacts with people and talks to them and so forth. So how this kind of an entity can do that is unclear. Maybe the people that were being talked to had words put into their mind by this agent, by this entity. And it wasn't actually a voice necessarily in the way we think of a voice of God. But maybe it's some sort of other way of mind-to-mind talking. There's many different ways you can think about this. We have to break out of, in medieval philosophy, we really have to break out of a lot of our comfort zones. Probably before you started this class, you were thinking maybe, medieval philosophy will be shallow and boring, and more modern philosophy will be more exciting. Maybe you might experience a little bit the opposite way. Modern philosophy, in a lot of ways, tries to come more into terms of being governed by human logic and limited by the finite and fallible nature of human logic, whereas medieval philosophy is not thinking of itself in any way, as we'll see, is wanting to be limited by human logic. Human logic might be the problem in some ways for medieval philosophers. So, now, let's see here. There's one more thing I wanted to cover. I'm not seeing it here. Well, I think it was maybe at the start here. Oops. Okay. I can't remember where it is, but somewhere in this document it talks in a couple different places about how God is identical to any properties God has. Should be right here. Not sure why I'm not seeing it here.
I think it was on the first page.
Is it? Okay. Yeah, right above here. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, right here. Sorry, thanks. The same holds for each of the divine omni-attributes. God is what he has, as Augustine puts it in the City of God. This is a big issue for medieval philosophy. He's identical to each of his attributes, identical to his nature. Okay? This is what contemporary philosophers back during, just after Augustine's time, all the way up till the present, have a problem with this. Something can't be identical to the properties it has. Now, that's I don't know. I don't really see why it's that much of a problem. You're talking about something that looks like this. God equals God's peace, or his love, or his omnipresence, existing everywhere. Okay? Or what's another property in Christian philosophy of God? He's crucified, etc. Okay? That's what this would look like. So if that verse we were talking about, Philippians 4:7, where it says God's peace transcends all understanding, what we're essentially saying is that God transcends all understanding. According to the Doctrine of Divine Simplicity would lead to that sort of a move. Yeah?
If God's not physical, then why does it matter, like, if it's equal to his parts?
Yeah, right, because the idea that properties can't be identical to a thing, like you're yourself, then you have the property of sitting, for example. So the idea is that the two are separate. You're not identical to the sitting act or something. This would be a philosophy derived for the material realm, not for the non-physical. So I think if I hear what you're saying, you're totally right. It's the same thing. We're taking our way of understanding things in the physical world and trying to understand something that transcends the physical with it. Okay? Yeah, great question. So we'll see this in medieval philosophy. There's no real yearning to be respectful to human logic. Which is controversial, because in our age, we live in a scientific age where we want to believe that human intelligence is very significant, and we're really finding out what reality is like by our own volition of our own minds. Fine. That's an assumption or a philosophy that's built into your existence here in the university. I'm not going to say it's right or wrong or anything. It's different than Christian philosophy, which would think that human logic restricts a person's understanding. Any other questions to this point? Anything? Okay. So divine simplicity, we're just skimming the surface. There's a lot to it. But God does not have any parts in time or in extension or any inner complexity, which is saying the same thing we just said. So therefore, for that reason, God is beyond your ability to comprehend, at least in this state of your consciousness, in your ordinary state of consciousness. Here existing on earth. Okay, so I'm going to go to your next reading, which I put on Blackboard on Monday, from this book here, Philosophy and Theology in the Middle Ages, by G.R. Evans. This is probably would seem to be the best account of medieval philosophy and theology that I know of. It's not my area of expertise, but I studied it a bit, and I'm very interested in it. So let's start plowing through this. There's about, I think, 30 pages in it. Obviously, I don't know how far we'll get, but I just wanted to put up enough just in case we happen to go faster than I thought we would. So on the first page here, you'll notice the section is titled Proving the Existence of God. That is a concern of medieval philosophers, but also of philosophers in the present day, today. And there's a couple things about this here. Just sit back and think about it for a second. You all probably know that Christianity involves the idea of faith, right? Now, to my understanding, faith is often defined as being just belief. Okay. Now, however, if you take a look at what's in the Bible, that's not really what's going on. You've got people having visions of God, and therefore that sets them on their Christian mission. So it's something much more than faith, or more than just raw belief. You know, believing something is like, I believe that.
When I sit in this chair, it's not going to collapse out from underneath me.
Okay, good. I like it. I believe the floor underneath me is not going to break. I started my diet, so hopefully that's helping. Kind of a weak start, unfortunately, but getting there. So, now that's something we don't have empirical information for. Belief is usually thought of as being different from direct experience. There's a drumstick. How many of you don't need to believe it, you just know it. So you can believe and know it, but belief is sort of not necessarily needed. That's usually belief without experience is what faith is usually referred to as. Again, in my opinion, that's not what faith means in the Bible. Because, as I said, you've got all these old biblical heroes all over the Bible having, some traveling in the visions, traveling to heaven and so forth. There's the famous Road to Damascus event with Paul, or his name was Saul, and then it got changed on that event to Paul, where he saw Christ, God, right on that road, and that he was a Christian, if I understand, partaking in killing them and so forth. And then that obviously changed everything. So, belief here, so faith must be, in biblical terms, not defined as just belief without information, without experience, but rather faith would be defined as an experience of beyond the physical realm. That's probably a really good, in my opinion, a better way to think of what at least the Bible is saying about faith. I don't know where the idea came along that it's just belief without experience to go along with it. So anyways, the point here in bringing this up is medieval philosophers are not going to be real concerned with, we just have to have, belief, faith in the terms of belief without experience, and that's it. No, these folks are concerned with, they want to prove that God exists through analysis and logic. And they want to because they think it will increase people's faith. It says that right here on the first page. The purpose is of trying to prove God exists is to heighten faith and ground it in intellectualism, not to win faith by recalculating or slow minds. Sorry. So like I said, this would be more in line with what I think faith is defined as in terms of in the Bible, I guess, which is some sort of experiential or logical information that will heighten your awareness of the supernatural, that which is beyond the realm of nature. So this is sort of, in my opinion, this is a decent disconnect here from what a lot of Christians are talking about. I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I've heard my whole life people saying you just have to believe. And then say, well, what do you mean believe? Usually that question isn't asked to go further to say, what do you believe? What does belief mean? And because I think people are usually meaning, and a lot of professional philosophers define faith, like we just said, in terms of belief, an idea not based on experience. Or, such as the experience of logic, or the experience of a scientific experience. But like I said, the Bible and these medieval philosophers don't go that direction. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like with faith, there has to be some sort of experience, or there's going to be no reason.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. So it's like faith is more of like a type of trust type thing.
Yeah.
That's how I view it. It's like almost like a trust without ever meeting the person. Like, you know, we trust our government to do. We have faith in our government. You know, not the best example, but it's
that's a bad.
Yeah. So it's kind of how I see it personally.
Yeah. No. Yeah. If I could paraphrase what you're saying, it's a good point. It would be difficult to believe you could have the largest religion in the world, which frankly has some strangeness to it, right? The creator of the world comes and dies in total humiliation, goes to the underworld, and comes back to life in his bodily form a couple days later, 3 days later. Okay? On and on and on and on, right? How could that become the largest, and it's growing. I think it's the largest religion in Japan. That should be kind of humorous because I thought Japan was a Buddhist nation. To my knowledge, though, Christianity overtook it. It would be difficult to believe that that could only happen by some absurd beliefs. Okay. Anyway, just you can take that how you want, but the implication here is that people are experiencing something. That's an interesting point, though, because the atheist will say that Christianity is completely made up, and all, the billions of Christians out there are simply, it's like they're believing a make-believe story. Okay, fine, but it is difficult to explain then how you can have such an incredible following. Why not get a following like that with Buddhism, which is pretty well in line with science in a lot of ways, in my opinion. I actually published an article in the Indian Journal of Buddhist Studies about 9 years ago on that topic, and man, there were Buddhist philosophers in the 700s, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700s AD, like Dharmakirti in India. He's a good one, good example. They were talking about atomism in a way down to fine-tooth comb details that sound just like quantum physics today. Some of the weird discoveries that. So in other words, Buddhists studied atomism long ago, and now we've got contemporary particle theorists studying, essentially doing the same study, but in scientific terms with scientific machinery, and they're coming to the same conclusions to a really astonishing detail. So why wouldn't a religion like that overtake as being the largest religion in the world? Now, Buddhism is growing, of course. So it's just interesting that Christianity can have such a be that widespread. So yeah, right here. Want to win the believer through reason. The unbeliever through reason. That's what they're going for here. All right. Now this again, I think this is a little different than what you're told in, maybe by Christians today, where proof, who cares? Now I get that they're not concerned with it because they just want to have their religious practice. Cool. They're not concerned with all this intellectual stuff. But on the other hand, these fellows are saying if we can defeat the atheist in argument with our analysis, it can convert people over to Christianity. That's essentially where they're going. Okay. There's still people on that, on doing a lot of this today, but I think it's more just internet groups and so forth. All right, so there was a quest for a single argument which could prove that God truly exists. All right, and that everything falls under that umbrella. All right, and could also coherently include all of his properties. All right, so very bold, I guess, maybe from our perspective here in 2016, but not to these people here. All right. Okay, so let's bring up a couple points here. Now, as far as your quiz goes, I would definitely know some things about divine simplicity. Oh wait, we have a quiz on Monday, not Friday. Be able to define divine simplicity for sure, and have a. Some of these concepts here we're talking about learning about God through reason as being a major drive for medieval philosophers. It's very important. That's what we're going to see them preoccupied with for the next 4 and a 10th classes that we study medieval philosophy. So here again, so the supreme nature, that's referring to God, exists through itself and has no prior cause. I think this is about 3 pages or so into the handout, which is from this book here. Of course it has no prior cause. It's eternal, remember? The Doctrine of Divine Simplicity refers to God as being outside of time. Only things that exist in time have a start, a cause, a moment of causative origination. All right? So, the supreme nature, God, does not depend on anything but itself. All right? It does not have anything that brought it into existence, according to medieval Christian philosophy. So that sets up some very interesting issues. It's not necessarily the case that you might say, well, so God existed in time, infinitely into the past. No, this is that's still to think of God in terms of time, having temporal parts, pieces of its existence in different times, which would violate the doctrine of divine simplicity. Rather, God is outside of time, does not exist in time. You can think of it as one moment that is eternal. Okay? One moment, not more than one. That's my own way of putting it. That's not the best way to put it. So very different than anything you recognize in your life, and avoids the concept of there being nothingness. Okay, because it always is there, eternally. All right? Now another concept, one of my favorites here in medieval philosophy, God made all things from nothing. Now, that comes from the Bible. It's called creation ex nihilo. Let me write this over. Well, there's three ideas here. There's creation ex nihilo. That is creation from nothing. Then there's creation ex deo. Forgot to spell it, I'm sorry. But that's creation from God. So God used his own being to create what he created. We can just go with those for now. This is the one that has been chosen to be used for Christian doctrine. So God did not use his own being to create his creation. He used nothing at all. It just came into existence because he said so, is what where medieval philosophers following the Bible are going to go. So that would mean that nature is not holy. This is something that often irritates people in our contemporary time. Nature is not holy, only God and heavenly things are, angels and so forth. Maybe anything of the heavenly, if your consciousness, in other words, can exist if it's non-physical, as we've discussed. It's spirit, as Christian philosophy would involve. Perhaps it doesn't fully exist in the physical, maybe parts of it exist in the heavenly, the non-physical, the transcendent realm, and therefore can also be holy. Okay? But your body, which would be separate from your consciousness, would be unholy. Okay, so there's a division here. The creation, which was not created from God, but from nothing by God, is unholy, created by a holy Creator. Okay, we will start there on Friday, and no quiz, and